Before we jump in, really quick show of hands. Who has used Flutter? Who's heard of it? Anything? Okay, we got a few. Has anyone written a book on Flutter? Good. Because about 2 years ago, I gave a talk on Unity. And I'm like, okay, I know enough to show everyone about Unity and get them started. So I started talking and I said, who knows Unity? And a guy in the back puts his hand up. And then halfway through the talk, I come to find out the guy just published a book on Unity. And he could have taught the whole talk, He's answering questions that I couldn't. I'm like, oh, I'll pass it over to you and you. So anyways, but I want to give you an intro to Flutter. Before we do that, who am I? Why should I be talking about Flutter? I've led the Quicken Loans mobile team for a few years. I just switched out of that role. Now I get to play with really cool emerging technology at Quicken Loans. So that's a lot of fun. I'm a founder and co-lead of the Google Developers Group in Detroit for the last 7 years. About a year ago, I founded the Windsor Google Developers Group. So we have 2 big conferences coming up in September and October. We'd love to have you speak. If you want to learn more information, come talk to me, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So agenda. So my goal, just before I jump into the agenda, let's just get it out there. My goal is for you to walk away today and want to go and investigate Flutter. I'm not going to teach you Flutter. I got 35 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. Actually, I got probably 30 minutes now, but I just want to give you a taste of what it's like, why I'm interested in it. I've watched mobile for the last 8-9 years. I've done native development. We do a lot of native development at Quicken Loans. I've seen cross-platform development tools come along, Ionic, Xamarin. Back when it was called PhoneGap, I actually got to meet the founders. That was cool. And then it became, what did it become? Cordoba and all those things. So I've watched them come and go, and there's some things that I like about Flutter. So, and on top of that, one thing I learned, or the last, about 100 days ago, I don't know if I, I'm Canadian, obviously. I don't know if you can tell, but we recently legalized pot. So I don't know if in 100 days ago I maybe got some bad fumes from someone smoking pot on the street, but I decided to start this code challenge called 100 Days of Code. So 100 Days of Code is after work every day, you code for 1 hour on your own time. You log what you did, you build something productive, and you do it in something you've never done in. So yesterday was day 92. Now I won't say I did 100 days continuous. I'm not that good. I skipped a day here or there. My kid's birthday, I skipped that day. My wife wouldn't have liked that, and so the family wouldn't have liked it. But I did 100 days. So I've been doing 100 days of Flutter development, and I want to share some of the stuff I learned and why I think it's really good. So what is Flutter? It's an open source cross-platform mobile development. Let's pick that apart. So obviously open source, you can go look at the source code for anything in Flutter, which is great. Google's got it all up there. There's no hidden layer there from what I've been able to find. Cross-platform. Now, it's not just cross-platform Android, iOS. We'll get into it a little further, but it also supports web. It also supports Chrome OS, so that's pretty cool. It was announced in 2015, not a lot of fanfare. Slowly been growing. In December of 2018, Flutter 1.0 shipped. May of 2019, when Google has their big Google I/O developer conference, they announced Flutter 1.5, and it's available on iOS, Android, Chrome OS, and web. So Flutter is backed by Google. It's one of their languages or frameworks, and what I find cool is, now also what I should add is so it's got iOS, Android, it works on both, Chrome OS, so I don't know how many guys, quick show of hands, what do you guys think, or not show of hands, but what do you guys think the penetration of Chrome OS devices is out there right now? 50%? 50% of new notebooks sold. Are they Chrome OS? They're running Chromebooks? So that's high. It's in Q4 of 2018, it was 22%. So 22% of new notebooks are running Chrome. Flutter now, you can write a Flutter app and it will run native on a Chrome OS device. So, and a lot of those are, they're going to education, they're going to schools, right? So you can write native Chrome OS apps now in Flutter. web too. And this was a project called Project Hummingbird for the longest time. And it recently became part of Flutter, where you can write Flutter, a Flutter app, and it now compiles down to JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and everything else that goes along with it. But you write it in the Flutter framework. And I've been doing that for the last actually 30 days. So as part of that, our, just one moment here. Part of that, our conference website for the Michigan Dev Fest, which is live right now, I wrote this in Flutter. So I just picked it up, wrote it as if I was writing an iOS or an Android app. Now, I'm not a designer, so it doesn't look super pretty, but I'm looking for some design help, but I'm continuing on with it. So it is definitely doable. They don't actually recommend you do it in production yet with Flutter for web. It's not production ready, but I figured it's not a terribly difficult site, so we went with it. So on top of that, Flutter is available. How many people have heard of Fuchsia? So we got a few. Fuchsia is it's kind of a little bit of a mystery as to what it is. It's an operating system that Google announced. And initially everyone thought, oh, it's a replacement for Android. At Google I/O this year, they clarified that a little more, where they're building this operating system, and they're talking about like taking parts of that and rolling it into Android, maybe Chrome OS. But it's an interesting experiment for them, because they call it an experiment, where they're building out this operating system called Fuchsia, and you can download it. It's interesting. Yesterday, they actually set up the site, or the fuchsia.dev site. If you go to it, they updated and they put a ton of documentation on there, so you can actually go look and see how you build something for Fuchsia. But you build in Flutter is the framework you build Fuchsia apps for. So it's interesting in that respect. When you go and read the documentation for Fuchsia, it says the fact that you can build iOS and Android apps was a side effect of Flutter being available for Fuchsia. So it's growing. Like it's a cool thing, because you can write once and then basically run it in many places, which I know that's the Holy Grail. It's been the Holy Grail forever. I think they've got a lot of things right in that case, in this case. What is Dart? So Flutter is a framework. Dart's what you write it in. It's a language that's been around Google since 2011. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention. Google used it. They were the biggest user. I just looked up on the TIOBE, most popular programming languages. And Dart was 24 in 2018. So it's moved up the charts over the last few years as Flutter has come on board and started using it as its language. Statically typed language, similar to JavaScript and Java. It's object-oriented, and it's got a lot of syntactic sugar. If you know JavaScript, Dart's going to feel very much at home. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Has anyone played with Dart? Oh, okay. One thing about Dart, Google uses it for their ad. So when you buy ads through Google and you administer your ads, that website, I can't remember what it's called for the top of my head, that's all written in Dart. So basically, Google's put a lot of their own mission critical stuff right in Dart. I mean, the company makes 90% of their profits off of selling ads, and the site they use to manage selling those ads to clients is written in Dart. So this is not a fluke. This language is pretty solid. It's got a lot of cool things. So why? I've been kind of explaining this, but why Flutter? Why now? Why a cross-platform development platform? So the biggest thing I think that I like about Flutter is what they've done is they've got I'll show you really quick if I can. There's a graphic that will illustrate what I'm talking about a little better. So this is Flutter for web. This is their site. Everyone see this okay? We good? So there's a framework up top. It's in Dart. You got your theming, your widgets, all that, everything in green is Flutter framework. That's cool. That's the portable part. You take that, you run that on you write in that. The part in yellow is what gets swapped out depending on what platform you're on. So if you're on Android or iOS, they use a rendering engine called Skia. If you're in Chrome OS, I believe they use Skia. This is Flutter for web, so they use Canvas, JS Engine, and the DOM. So they swap out that lower, that yellow part there, and what they do is instead of getting a lot of cross-platform development frameworks, basically there's a bridge. So if you're on iOS, there's like a JavaScript bridge over to maybe an iOS button, a Cupertino-styled button. And that's what they do. They do this bridge, and there's always some latency between the bridge. Flutter, basically, think of it as on my iOS device, my iPhone, I've got a canvas. And that's a blank canvas, and Flutter controls it. And the Flutter framework draws every element on there, and it mimics how those elements will work. So a button, Flutter framework will draw it. It will mimic a click event on it. It will mimic everything. So they control the whole canvas at that point. They control what they're going to update. So that's the best I can think of, like description or analogy. But they can, and because they can do that, they can get 60 frames per second performance on mobile devices. They don't make that claim on web because web's still being developed. And Chrome OS, I think it's around 30 frames per second, but don't quote me on that. So because they control the whole canvas and they control everything they're drawing, they can match it up pixel perfect, but you can also go down and draw on the canvas as you see fit. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, I want to, because this is the big, it's big, sorry. It's important to understand why. Why is this, like, why now? Why learn another framework, another language, We got millions of them, right? So that's the biggest thing. Now, for me, I found it really easy to as a mobile developer, I started as an Android developer at Quicken Loans, worked my way up and so on and so forth. But as a mobile developer, I found it really easy to jump into Flutter. It didn't have a lot of web side to it, so I could learn that. But I mean, coming from mobile development or web, I've heard both sides of it where it's easy to pick up. And on top of that, it's really fast to get an app running. So I've heard multiple accounts of people setting up a mobile app over a weekend. So they had an idea, that next $1 million you're going to make, and they get that app scaffolded up and running in a weekend. So that's why. So what are we going to build today? So here's the thing. I don't know how else to convince you to use this except to show you some of it. But I can't show you, I'm not going to show you everything. I'm not going to show you the whole, like a whole program, because I don't know if I have all that time. But what I have done, is I've got all of this in my Git repo. This presentation is in like 17 different formats. PDF, PowerPoint, Keynote, whatever you want. You can go and look at it. It's also, I've got every code snippet. You could build the project from scratch using that. We're going to build this app here on the right here. It's a simple app. You tap on that button, it adds some logos to the screen. It's a scroll view. It's about 75 lines of code. It runs on iOS and Android. I'm showing it on Android here, but I've run it equally well on iOS. So, a few things, before you get started, you got to get the Flutter SDK installed. You go to flutter.io to do that. Interesting thing, it supports a bunch of IDEs. Visual Studio Code is one I like just because it's lightweight. It has full set of extensions for it. Android Studio has first-class support. IntelliJ has first-class support. What else? There is a Vim plugin if you want, or a VI. I've tried that out. So it's gone pretty wide, but there's a lot there. And then you have to get an Android or iOS simulator working on your machine. So you can check that out. This GitHub is where my presentation is and all of the, I'll just show you really quick what's there. So basically it's a Flutter project. What I've done is all of the examples that I show you they're in these Dart files. They're outside of the project, so they won't run because there's like small code snippets in there, but you could grab any one of them and look at it and say, okay, copy it in and run it. So I figured that was an easy way. You get some homework if you want to learn more. Cool. So as I said, there's a lot of IDE support. There's also command line support for Flutter. They steal from other platform or other frameworks, obviously, but there's something called Flutter Doctor. So when you're setting up Flutter, you run Flutter Doctor, and let me see if I got it. Here, I'll run it right here. Flutter. It's going to go and it's going to give me a system health of what my system, like how it's set up. You know, okay, Flutter's installed, the Android toolchain's installed, the iOS toolchain's installed, Android Studio's good, VS Code's good, and I've got no devices connected right now. So really helpful. If you break stuff, this will tell you how to fix it. That's really cool because, I mean, I've broke so many things. I'm kind of one of those ones that goes down a rabbit hole. So if I find a problem, I'm like, oh, you know what? I could pivot, or I'm going to just spend like 2 days trying to figure this out. And this has been helpful just to say what, you know, if it's my system or it's something I'm trying to do. So Flutter Doctor, something you know, that's definitely a tool you want in your tool belt. Like a lot of other frameworks, Flutter Create, whatever your app name, creates a full app for you, gives you all the directories. Once you go into that directory, you can run Flutter Run, runs the app. One other thing I really like about Flutter, which I don't know of any other cross-platform development tools that have this quite to the level that this tool has. When you're developing mobile apps in native, you write some code, and then you spin up the simulator, and then you run it. Flutter has something called hot reload and restart. So, cool thing, when I'm in, oh darn it, I can't quite show you without having a simulator running. Let me see if I can. That might take too long. But so the thing is, when you're developing a mobile app, you want to be able to, say you want to change some text on the screen that's 3 screens deep in your app. So with hot reload in Flutter, and you're running it from the command line, you hit R, and it keeps you on that 3rd screen that you're already on. It maintains the state of the app, but it changes the text. So it's really quick, like back and forth. I go change something, hot reload, hot restart. I can do a hot restart, which restarts the whole app, but I can also do that hot reload where I don't actually have to navigate in, or I don't have to log in again to get to that, you know, the 5th page of my app. Just hot reload, and it's there. If I had the simulator running right now, I'd show you. We can change some text on a screen and you'll see. So that really makes it, that's another reason you want to try this out, because it's fast, and the web version of it also has that. So when you change something in the app, you're running it, it's automatically updating, which is not a new thing for web, but for mobile, that is a new thing. That's something that you don't see very often. Do we have many mobile developers in the group? We do, okay. So, you know, call me out if I'm not telling the truth here, but Yep. Okay. Sorry, who was? I didn't. Oh. So it has some of it, but yeah, it has a state too, even?
Yeah, you can start adding components while the thing's running and the app changes.
But that's kind of relatively new, right? Yeah. This has had it for 2+ years now with Flutter, like the hot reload. So, and Android's had a little bit of it too.
I mean, we used to do that in with .NET, web development, where you could have the app running.
Yep.
You could make a change in your code and refresh the page, and the page would just
yeah,
update automatically.
Yeah, and that's for web. That's perfect. That works well. For mobile, native mobile, that hasn't kind of always been the case. You know, the hot reload. iOS is getting that support. I know Android has got a little bit of it also. So, and then here's what your project gets spun up with. This is a directory, really quickly, just running through. That IDE A directory, that's just for your IntelliJ IDE. So that's files in there. Android is basically all your Android build, your Gradle files, things of that sort. Assets, that's a directory actually I created in this project, so you don't need to worry about that. But you can put in any images or fonts or anything of that sort. Your build directory, you're going to get all your outputs there. You're going to grab your APK file, your IPA file, whatever else you build. iOS, obviously all of your config for iOS is in there. The lib file is, the lib directory is where you're going to write your Dart code. So Dart starts with a main. It looks for a main method, like C, C++, and we'll dig into that. Test, that's where you'll put your unit tests and any UI testing you want. The rest of it you can pretty much ignore except for pubspec YAML. And that's your dependencies file. So if you're gonna, the one thing about Flutter is there's an active community, a lot of plugins going on. Google has a lot of plugins. I don't know, has anyone used Firebase? Okay, so Firebase is a first-class citizen for Flutter. So you can easily incorporate, for those who don't know, Firebase is, it's a collection of mobile services that Google has published for mobile developers. It started out as a real-time database. Now they've got everything from push notifications, machine learning with MLKit, so Google Translate's in there just recently. What else? A/B A/B testing. There's a ton of services that you can get in Firebase. And Firebase is first-class support right in here. So really quick, I'm going to start from scratch and we're going to see how far we can get. I think I'll get you a little bit started and then you can go from there. And that GitHub page has the rest. Yes, certainly.
What do you mean by first-class support?
So what I mean by first-class support is the Google team that's developing Flutter are writing the plugins for Firebase. So it's, if you go to the GitHub, the repo for actual packages, they're there. As I've done, I can give you an example. As I've done the 100 days of code, yesterday was 92, so back earlier, I actually ran into a problem where I was like incorporating one of the Firebase services push notifications. And I was like, hey guys, I tweeted to the Flutter team like, hey, it would be really cool if you added this. And a few weeks later, it's in the package. So it's really cool. Like the Google team that does Flutter, they're right in step with Firebase. And some of the new stuff that they announced at Google I/O with Firebase, like I don't know if you're familiar with MLKit. If you guys haven't tried MLKit, it's available for JavaScript. It's available for, just an aside here, iOS, Android, but it's basically some of Google's best models, machine learning models that they've ever trained. You can now download them into your app and run them. And they give you all the plumbing to get them into your app. So in iOS, if you want to use Google Translate for like, you get a camera and you scan over some text that's in a foreign language, that machine learning model that does that is now available in MLKit. Incredibly powerful. It's really cool, and now it's available in Flutter, it's available in Android, iOS, and JavaScript. So check it out if you haven't checked it already. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So VS Code open main.dart. This is how we would start a project. First thing I do is wipe it clean. I mean, when you start the project, create the application, you're going to get a scaffold out, app. Wipe it clean. First thing you want to do is import material.dart, which is a material. Material is a design language that Google has created. You can import Cupertino, material, and use it. So this gives you all of the elements that you need. And then void main, very simple. It's your main function. It's going to start there. How are we doing for time? I don't mind.
We have
3
3 minutes.
minutes, okay. Well, we'll get started a little bit here. First thing up, we're gonna call a function called run app, and it's gonna return a widget. So in the next 3 minutes, I'm gonna explain this much. Everything in Flutter is a widget. So from a button to padding on the screen, to the screen itself, to the app itself, they're all widgets. So that's an important concept. We are going to add a widget. We're going to return a widget. So this run app returns a widget. That arrow notation just is equivalent to return this. Let's talk about widgets. Everything is a widget. There's two types. A stateless widget, which is just display. And that's kind of a flag to the system. Hey, you can draw this once and you don't have to redraw it. Because Flutter only redraws what it needs to on the screen. That gets it that 60 frames per second performance. Stateful widgets means I'm going to, you got to maintain some state here and you're going to be called to redraw yourself. So there's examples of how you would do those two. We're going to create our first widget. Now, every widget has a build method. And that's where you put your code. That's where you put all of your stuff. This is basically boilerplate. VS Code will generate this for you. But you see widget build. I'm overriding that method of this widget. Whoops. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return a material app. So as I said, the app itself is a widget. I'm going to return a material styled app widget, and the title is going to be TechWatch Detroit. So widgets and constructors. So as I said, everything's a widget. Just let me give you a flavor of what a program, like what this app would look like. This is the app that I just showed you earlier, where I'm adding, continually adding cards. So here's our main class up here. Can everyone see that okay? The black's okay, everyone? My app extends a stateful widget because it's going to update the screen, so the state's going to change. Basically what I want to show you really is the build function. So in the build function, I'm going to return a widget for this app, and it's going to be of type material app. I'm going to instantiate a widget. It's called title. Home is going to return another widget of type scaffold, and it just keeps going down and down and down. So it's basically a tree of widgets is what you build out your app in. Let me just show you a little bit here. But when you instantiate a widget, you call a constructor. Everyone's familiar with constructors, obviously, I assume. So you call a constructor. Dart has a concept of named parameters and positional parameters that you pass into your constructor. And when you're using Flutter, you're heavily relying on named parameters to a constructor. So here down below is a definition for, this is what a text widget puts a text box on the screen, or text box with text on it on the screen. That's what the constructor looks like. It takes obviously data, string data. That's what the text is that's what text is going to be on there. But everything in here between these curly braces, these are named parameters and they're optional. So when you're declaring an object or you're creating a widget, you call the constructor and you call whichever one of these named parameters you want, you set them, and that draws that widget on the screen. So for instance, let's pick style there. So text style, so it'd be style, colon, and then whatever I want to set that to for this object. Actually, so I think what we're going to do now, because we're going to get into a lot more code, and basically what it looks like is this. It's a lot of take this step and do this. We're adding code. Now, the thing about this is, if you are interested, we go and we look at my project, what I've got up in GitHub. Example 1 here is that code. Example 2 adds a little more. Example 3, 4, 5. So if you want to go and try this out, you could build out the 75 lines of code that this is. Follow example 1. You take each of these examples, you copy it into this main.dart file here, and run it. Main.dart is what gets run. So I think I'm going to leave it there right now and take questions because just due to time. Is that fair? What questions we got? Sure.
Can you put up the GitHub page?
Yeah, certainly. So it's Flutter dash Detroit Tech, or I think we can post it somewhere later.
Oh, okay.
But it's basically that project I just showed you in VS Code is here. Here's the presentations. You can take a look at those at any time offline. And you can, all of the example, that code I just showed you, it's right there. The key to it is this lib directory. So when you run the program, it goes into the lib directory and it looks for the main function. So whatever you put in main.dart, you can rename that, but it's looking for a main function. Whatever you put in there is what's going to run. So you could copy stuff out of it. Like, you know, it's kind of nice. You can just copy the example code out, copy it in, run it as you see fit. Any other questions? I saw another. Oh, yeah.
So if you ever have to store data, you usually just use Firebase?
Depends. I mean, I've used Firebase. Firebase has two data stores. They have a real-time database, which is the actual, what originally Firebase was. And they have, now it's called Cloud Firestore, which is now, I would use that instead, but yes, it's pretty simple to do that. You'd use stateful widgets to do that, and you know, you could just pull data down. Whenever the data changes, if you hook it up, the stateful widget will redraw itself on data change. So and that's one of the nice things. Initially when, so Firebase was a company that Google bought in 2015, I believe. And their big claim to fame is we have this real-time database that you don't, if you're running a mobile app, you don't have to actually go and ask for updates in the data. We push them, we publish them to you. So the classic app for them was a chat client. You know, I'm chatting and the app, I don't have to write any code as soon, you know, to go query the database. I automatically get the data from Firebase. So that was the real-time database. And they bought that company and they rolled it in, and then they renamed everything Firebase. So all their services became Firebase for mobile. And right now, the real-time database is only available in one cloud region. That's the thing, it's only available in North America. They've moved it over to this thing called Cloud Firestore, which is available worldwide. So that's really what you want to use.